Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week joining us from beautiful East Coast Canada is Andrew Mitchell. Hey Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vasco. It's great to be here. It's an honor.
Absolutely, a pleasure to have you here. So Andrew describes himself as prioritizing people when building products, aiming for happy and engaged employees who create great products and serve customers well. He emphasizes trust, psychological safety, servant leadership, and believes that Scrum is the best framework to achieve these goals. And he was also the host of the Product Owner Summit 2023, where we collaborated as well. Andrew, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Yeah, thank you, Vasco. My Scrum Master role, I think I've always been drawn to this. In fact, I think this role picked me. I don't know that I necessarily picked it. Of course, you know, as someone at 52 years old, this role didn't exist really when I came out of school in the early 90s. But let me tell a story a bit early on. When I was about 5 or 6 years out of school, and I was got the chance to lead a small project. I'd already started reading. It was like 2001, 2, and I was starting to read about rational unified process and some of the iterative processes, and I was really drawn to that early on. So I went to my program manager and I said, I was again leading a small team. I said, can I put together a framework of iterative processes, like of putting together just prototypes and showing them to our customer and then going back and working on those. And despite this being a very traditional waterfall program, she accepted that, and that was really successful. And again, so that was an early win for me. You know, fast forward a few years later, and I'm studying to become a project manager. I, like you, consider myself a recovering project manager. But I remember studying the body of knowledge from PMI, and I was really drawn to the quality section. And in particular, I was drawn to Deming and the plan, do, check, act cycle, the wheel. And looking back at that now, I realize why. I mean, Deming's, you know, considered one of the fathers of modern Scrum and Agile. That process just always made sense to me. So, you know, I did spend some time as a project manager, being and leading traditional waterfall type projects, but something never quite felt authentic to me. Finally, in about 2009, 2010, I took a Scrum class. I'd heard about this thing and ended up on a couple of years later on a project that was doing a version of Scrum. And it just felt right. It just felt like that was the right way to lead people, to kind of make my vision of having happy, engaged people, have trusting, psychologically safe teams. It was the right way to do that. So that journey continued, and I ultimately found a full-time role as a Scrum Master and loved it and continue to learn. And I've never looked back. It's a role that just suits me.
And even though, Andrew, you felt chosen by the role, just like a Jedi chose Luke in the famous story. Luke is a little bit of an avatar for us here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, because we are very often drawn into the role without knowing why or even understanding the force behind the role. And just like Luke in the Star Wars saga, we also find our challenges. Whether we like it or not, those challenges are part of our journey. And in many cases, actually, they shape the way we think about Scrum and the work that we do. So, Andrew, today's Fail Monday, of course. So we want to explore one of those stories. So tell us a story of a failure. Walk us through the steps. Like how did it start? What were the things that were going on? And we'll dive into the conclusions and insights later. But tell us that story first.
Yeah, sure. There's so many stories that you could pull from. I think back to a time I was very excited. About 5 or 6 years ago, I joined a product development company. I'd been in consulting. I was really excited to get into product development as a Scrum Master. Admittedly, I was relatively new to the Scrum Master role at that point. And I was also coming to a team that had some challenges in flight. They had been working for about 2 years and hadn't delivered anything to production. They were working on a new product, but the goalposts for this product kept moving and the business kept setting new acceptance criteria. So you can think of a team that's kind of demotivated and demoralized. And then the third factor for me was I was also replacing a really highly experienced project delivery executive who had been brought in to lead this team as a consultant. And she was amazingly talented, but a very command and control type project leader. I have mad respect for her, and I know she's been incredibly successful in her career. But what that led to is a team that didn't have a high level of trust. Were very suspicious of this outsider coming to the organization.
So when you say trust, do you mean like the team didn't trust themselves to deliver, or what do you mean?
They didn't seem to have trust for each other, right? There was small groups like QA. The QA team didn't trust the engineers. The product owner tended to decide with QA. There was just and of course, everybody blamed the business for not giving them the right requirements, and they didn't have trust for their leadership. So it was a major challenge. For me, the big problem was that I thought that I needed to be like that leader that I replaced. I tried to be directive. I tried to be command and control with the team. I wasn't.
Can you give us an example of what that looked like?
An example would be, yeah, for sure. Like actually, with my next comment was going to be how I thought I had to have all the answers. You've been in that role as a project manager, and the team is looking to you for the answers, and I'm trying to tell them what the direction that they need to go. I'm new to the product. I'm new to the company. I'm new to the industry. It was medical technology, and they're looking to me for answers, and I just didn't know them. But so I tried to push them in particular ways, and push them towards. Another example would be pushing them towards deadlines that were not achievable. And I knew weren't achievable, and trying to force people to work extra time. And yeah, that ended up being very unsuccessful. That team and I did not get along. I struggled for probably close to a year with that team until I kind of stepped back. I remember there was one time a retrospective where I knew it was kind of an inflection point with the team, where I knew I had to be authentic to myself, to not be a command and control project leader. And in this retrospective, I remember I was the first one to put a sticky on the board and say, I don't even remember what it was, Vasco, but I remember it's like, here's this one thing that I know I have been doing wrong as a team, and I am going to change that. And that one thing, I mean, there was much more that came, but that one admission of a mistake on my part just changed the team, and it was an inflection point where we started moving towards trusting each other more and working together as a team, and we just started to have more open and honest conversations.
When you think about the process, so being a recovering project manager myself, I can totally see why we would fall into the pattern of giving answers, right? Especially, and that's not helped by the fact that the team usually asks questions from us and we want to help. Mm-hmm. But when you look at that, and of course, now that you are, today with the benefit of hindsight and all of those years of more experience, what do you think was the trigger for you to kind of stay in that mode of giving answers rather than, as we know we should always do as Scrum Masters, asking more questions?
Yeah, I think 100% it was my project management background. It was, leading traditional waterfall projects and telling folks that they had to work on task ABC because the project schedule said it starts today and it ends in 2 weeks. That traditional mindset that I just don't think works well in software development, that carried over, and it kind of embodied in the organization. I admittedly was hired for this role because I was more of a project manager than a Scrum Master. The organization was early in its transformation. So again, it's that traditional mindset. I'm actually speaking to a group in a couple of weeks about my transition from project manager to Scrum Master and the skills you need to leave behind and the new things you need to learn. I was really too early in that journey to help that team in the way they needed to.
And for those that are listening to us, and you don't need to tell all of the tidbits you're going to share in that talk, what do you think are 1, 2, or even 3 things that all people that have a project manager background or experience should be self-aware of when transitioning to Scrum?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it as a journey. I use a journey metaphor. And in any journey, you need to figure out what to take with you and what you leave behind. One of the things you need to leave behind is control, or at least the illusion of control. I think project planning and Gantt charts give us the illusion of control. You need to leave that behind. You need to leave behind what one PMI person I heard speak of called, if it is to be, it is up to me, right? It's not all on you as a project manager. I try to reform that as a Scrum Master and a Scrum team. It's, if it is to be, it's up to we. We as a team need to come together. We have shared accountability. There's no longer this, as one boss of mine used to say, the one neck to choke on it, which is the project manager. It's the entire team. You need to leave some of those ideas behind.
Yeah, and the concept of shared leadership is actually quite difficult to grasp unless you have like a very vivid experience of what that could look like, right? Like I remember being aware that I was trying to create that kind of environment in one of the teams, and I remember kind of like using something we should always use, which is questioning, right? Like mirroring and questioning. So I was trying to put questions back to the team, and slowly over months, not in one day, but slowly this team started to take over. And in one meeting, I remember that there was a problem that the team needed to solve. And the problem had multiple aspects, right? Like, so there was the business aspect, the technology aspect, the testing, the go-to-market aspect. And I noticed how suddenly the whole team was collaborating, right? Like in the meeting, as the topic changed slightly to a more of one aspect, then you could see that somebody else in the team took leadership, and then it came back to technology, and then somebody with technology background took leadership, and that kind of almost like jumping, flowing leadership throughout the team is kind of a one practical illustration of what that means, right? Like it's not one person that solves the problem. It's not even one team member. It's all of the team members together.
Totally agree. And one of the things that I've really had to adjust to, and I think I'm pretty good at now, is embracing kind of the awkward silence. Because as a project leader, I think we feel we need to speak first when there's those silences. I've learned to just sit back and wait for other people to speak, because that generates the conversation when other people tend to speak up. So I think that's a really important skill set. And that's encouraging other folks to come forward with their own ideas.
Absolutely. That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us, Andrew.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.